friends, welcome to the All-Canadian Reptile Girl. This is Monty, I'm Annaliese, and how do you know that I know what I'm talking about? I semi-expertly portray someone with a sense of I definitely know what I'm doing, but how can you be sure? How can you be sure that any of the care information online is right? Fact is, sometimes it's not. Maybe it's out of date, or maybe just wrong. Most of the time, I think and hope, the care guides or information for a species are technically correct, but still might not be quite right for a particular individual within that species. Today, I will be tempting the wrath of the internet reptile crusaders and share with you some reptiles I care for outside of what's recommended in the care guides. Specific exceptions, I don't currently do dedicated care guides. I get asked to do care guides pretty regularly, and care guide videos generally do really well. So why? As someone who is trying very hard to grow my channel, it's so hard, you guys. Do I not take advantage of this and do a bunch of guides? Good question. Well, there are so many already out there. There's not a lot that I'm going to add to the discussion by doing the 8 millionth corn snake or bearded dragon care guide. Another reason is that current research and care information changes, but the internet is forever, and a care guide that presents the current best practice today can very quickly be out of date. And I don't really want to be remaking the same video over and over, you know? When you're looking to get your new scaly companion, researching before you get your new pet is really the best practice, which means you should be looking well in advance of when you are bringing your friend home. And when you Google for a care guide, that will bring you to a site like Reptiles, which has a lot of great information, or a video from a reptile tuber outlining the care. Vetting against multiple sources is a good idea too, yeah? So you're going to check out a few videos, and in most cases, you're probably going to see similar information from those multiple sources, and away you go to set up your pet's new home. That's kind of how it works. That's how I figured out how to care for my reptiles initially. That's probably how Adam did it, or Els Reptiles, or Emmeline, Dion. All of these folks who make wonderful care guides today probably started their education with a Google search or a YouTube video. But how do we know that the information they initially used to inform their own guides is right? Or the people who preceded them? Or preceded those folks, or before that, where did it start? Back in the day when reptiles first started to be kept as pets, we didn't have the robust domestically produced population that we do for most pet reptiles today. It's not like people were conducting all sorts of proper scientific studies on these animals to figure out how to keep them as pets before collecting them from the wild. For the most part, folks were grabbing what they could and figuring it out after. They would have had a rough idea of location, geography, climate, but it would have been mostly trial and error where only the hardiest of those wild-caught reptiles actually made it. Our hobby today would not be where it is without these early pioneers figuring out what these animals needed. But it came at the cost of a huge number of animals not making it. I know it's probably something that we are collectively uncomfortable thinking about, but as this hobby moves forward with the focus on domestically produced reptiles, advancing care requirements, and enrichment, we need to understand this legacy and acknowledge the sometimes ugly history. Undoubtedly, there were some involved in it strictly to make a buck who didn't care about the body count. But I choose to believe most of them were ardent animal lovers, and seeing those losses must have been devastating. Those efforts back in the day helped establish requirements that kept enough reptiles alive for them to say, yep, that'll work, and that's how they were kept. Early keepers would tweak and adjust, of course, but the genesis of our care standards came from trial and error methodology. While the evolution of them continues to keep our pets alive and healthy, are they really the best? Sometimes, yeah, but certainly not always. It can be hard to know which is which, because of the challenges of researching this in depth, and also because of some entrenched, sometimes toxically defended thinking within our hobby. On average, leopard geckos live for what? 15 years in captivity? And we seem pretty confident that that's okay. It's certainly far longer than they would live in the wild. But what if they could be 30 years old. They're widely kept as semi-arid, ground-dwelling pets, but we're also sometimes finding them in the wild in humid forests and up in trees. Is the current standard of semi-arid care shortening their lifespans? I'm not suggesting it is, at all, or that you should change your leopard gecko setups to swampy jungles. I'm just making the point that distilling the care of a complex living creature that lives outside through daily and seasonal changes to their environment to a set temperature and humidity range, and applying that is the best care to every single individual every single day, is not a guarantee that it is the optimal environment for thriving, let alone surviving. So now that we've kind of established how we got here, let's get to the actual point of this video. So, I've written and filmed this video and felt like I was being fairly balanced, but as I edit, I feel like I might sound like I'm coming across as kind of ranting on care guides, or people that follow care guides, or the people that started or promoted them, or the early herpetoculturalists, and that is not at all the case. Care guides are good. Follow the most recent care guides you can, and your pet should live a happy, healthy life. I've been trying to establish that how we've got these standards was sometimes a convoluted journey and isn't necessarily gospel to be followed to the letter. We're going to get to the point of all this soon, I promise. In the interest of time, while I'm here, I'll say a quick thank you to my patrons. You guys are awesome, and through your support, I'm able to build cool enclosures like the one that's behind me, provide the best care I can for my reptiles, and continue to tweak and adjust to continually improve. Thanks so much, you folks are the best. Okay, back to the rest of the video. So now that we've kind of established how we got here, let's get to the actual point of this video and talk about some of my animals that I keep outside of the care guides. Let's start with Monty, my ball python. If someone were to ask me what an ideal sized enclosure would be for a ball python, I'd tell them something over 4 feet long with some height and vertical enrichment. So at least an 85 to 120 gallon equivalent tank, depending on how deep it is. There are lots of other ways to keep happy and healthy ball pythons, don't get me wrong, but if someone was getting their first ball python and asked me how big of a home they should have, that's what I'd recommend in most cases. Here's how I keep my ball python. I know, let me explain. This is a small TV cabinet that I converted into an enclosure. It's about the size of a 40 gallon. It's a bit shorter than a glass 40, but deeper, so roughly 40 gallon. Bit of a far cry from 85 to 120 gallon, eh? And there's not a lot of height either for climbing. This size probably would have been considered pretty luxurious by care guide standards from the 80s and 90s, and probably by some, let's say, old school inspired keepers today. But it is far different than most modern standards for pet ball pythons, and even my own standards for ball pythons. So what gives? Well, it's not for lack of room or because it's convenient. We've had Monty in much larger enclosures with varying degrees of clutter and hides, and every time he was very skittish and would not move to regulate heat and refuse to eat. Put him in something tiny, and he eats like a champ from April to November anyway. He moves around his home, happily comes out, and generally seems far more relaxed. So that's what we give him. When outside of his enclosure, Monty is an awesome snake, no matter what home he's living in. He's always very friendly and always very gentle. He is a great snake. I mean, his full name is everybody's best buddy Monty, after all, so. But look at him, he's a sweetheart. Through recent studies, we now know that snakes kept exclusively in sparse, non-enriching environments can affect a snake's ability to adapt to new experiences. Without the choice to explore new things, especially early in life, the development of neural pathways in the hippocampus, which are needed to properly cope with new experiences, is affected. Instead, they tend to develop neural pathways in the amygdala, the section of the brain that processes fear. Basically, without enrichment, snakes' thought processes come from a fear-based perspective as opposed to a curiosity-based one. Instead of, ooh, what's over there? It's, oh, what's over there? I've had Monty for over 3 years, but at over 15 years old, that's as old as I am, he's actually the old man in my reptile family. For a lot of his life, he lived almost exclusively in a small dark bin. I should point out that the environment a snake lives in is not limited just to their enclosure. How often they are handled, enrichment opportunities, time outside, all factors into the overall environment. Even though he lived in a bin before coming to me, he had been handled regularly, allowed to explore outside his tub, and did educational programs with kids, which he still does with me. He's always had plenty of external stimulation and is very well socialized. He was well taken care of overall, but his home base was historically tiny. Having this tiny, cozy home as his safe space is how he feels most secure. I would love to house him in a huge, beautiful bioactive enclosure, but I would be doing that for me, not for Monty. What he wants, basically, is a hide within a hide to hide when he's not out exploring or hanging out with us or doing a program. If that's what serves him best, that's what he gets. Next up, Macklitz pythons. Okay, I guess for Hobbs and Callie, my Macklitz pythons, I do follow a care guide. Mine. I mentioned earlier that with a couple of specific exceptions, I don't do care guides. This is one of those exceptions. He's so stubborn. I truly believe that Macklitz pythons are the most underrated pet snakes I have ever interacted with. There are lots of contenders for that title, I know. And one of the reasons they are so largely ignored in the hobby comes down to the less than friendly reputation they earned back when they were a little bit more common as pets. Without the stunning colors or patterns to offset their bitey disposition, interest in them kind of fizzled out. Don't get me wrong. Macklitz pythons are gorgeous, but you kind of need to see them in person, in the sun, to really appreciate them. On camera, most of the time, he kind of just looks like a greenish brown plain snake. A plain snake and a lot of bleeding isn't really a combination that most folks are super excited about. But here's the thing, they don't have to be bitey. I have two Macklitz, both completely unrelated as far as I know, or as unrelated as one can expect with captive bred reptiles. One line's from Quebec, which is Hobbs, and the other's out west, Callie. And both are the sweetest, most curious, most intelligent snakes I have ever spent time with. And I think that a big part of that comes down to their care, and what was used as standards of care in the past did not provide them the physical, mental, and emotional fulfillment a snake like this needed. So you got a bitey, angry boy. That is why I did my care guide on Macklitz. And as I learn more about them, I will very likely update that guide in the future. There's that redoing care guides problem I mentioned, hey? I have my own guide, but online information on Macklitz care was out there before I came along. And modern information did sort of fill in some of the gaps in what I saw from how folks were caring for them 20 years ago, most notably the need for height and climbing enrichment. It was somewhat fragmented, but it was a start, and it was from those that I set up my care for Hobbs when I first got him. It was mostly web pages and forums, as opposed to actual videos, but the general requirements were hot and humid. There was some indication of cycling or spiking and dropping humidity specifically for breeding, but basically hot and humid. Given the region of the world that they live in, that kind of makes sense, and that was what I did initially, and Hobbs did just fine. But then I noticed a few things. For example, more often than not, he only basked for a short period of time in the morning before moving to the cooler spots of his enclosure, either the cold side or in his hot hide but burrowed down a bit into the substrate. If the fogger was put on his hot side, he would hang out more on that hot end, but generally, he stayed more in the mid-ish temperature range in his enclosure. I also noticed less activity when his enclosure was kept at a constant humidity in the 70 to 80% range. Again, he had no issues eating. He was okay with coming out to being handled, but he seemed to stay coiled up in one spot more often than not. With lower humidity or a drastic change, he seemed way more active and switched on. Instead of curling up in a corner or in a hide or on his basking spot, he'd be draped about his enclosure, really owning his space, you know? He'd be a lot more curious about what was going on outside and would come to see me at the doors a lot more quickly when I approached, that kind of thing. So I did a bit more digging into what they experience in the wild, I'll get to that in a minute, and did some experimenting and observation. I dropped his temps and fiddled with his humidity too. Instead of a steady sort of humid range, I'd spike his humidity way up and let it drop. I'll use a fogger for a bit here or there to keep it from plummeting, but I don't spray anything until the humidity drops below 50% for at least a day. then I repeat. I found that Hobbs was much happier and more active with this approach than from the online sources. He'd bask longer and move around more through his whole enclosure. He loves the rainstorm and comes out to play in the water and drink off the glass or from the branch like a fancy snake. A water bowl. A pedestrian. When we got Callie, my female, I used the same approach and she seemed just as happy. Your macklets might like it different than mine, but for Callie and Hobbs, they're happier bucking the trends. Last up is my Dumerals boas. Romeo, please. One moment. Lots of great information is out there on these guys, and with their popularity increasing, I expect we're going to get more. There are a couple of ways that I depart from what you might see in their standard care. One, I'm only going to touch on really quick because I did a video on this fairly recently. You can check it out here. It's generally accepted that Dumerals be kept alone, but I cohab my breeding pair year-round. If you have specific comments or questions about my cohabbing of these guys, I'll ask you to please watch this video first, because I probably address it there. The other departure relates to temperatures. Very similarly to my macklets, I noticed that neither really seemed to like the heat referenced in the care guides. This applied to both of them before I paired them for breeding. They stayed almost exclusively on their cold side, only basking for a few minutes in the morning, if at all. Now, Dumerals are known for being lazy and not moving around much, but for them to completely avoid half of their tank is an indicator that something is off over there. So I dropped their temps a bit, observed what they did, dropped a bit more, observed, and so on. When they stayed almost exclusively on their hot side, I knew I went too far, so I tweaked it back up a bit. What I landed on was a basking spot temp that was, depending on the care guide you read, 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit lower than most of the sources. They both moved back and forth to thermoregulate and seem much more relaxed. I will point out that one of the reasons I suspected that Desara might be gravid was that she was spending more time on the hot side, so I did up the temps a bit to help with incubation. But it was still not at the levels in some of the online guides. So you may be asking, Annaliese, if I think I need to divert from the care guides for my specific reptile, what do I do? Do I just start making changes willy-nilly? How do you know what adjustments to make? Well, I'm a touch psychic, so that helps. But if you aren't, yeah, no, you're not. Fear not. There are tons of resources beyond the care guides to help you, so you don't need to go the trial and error route. I actually got the inspiration from watching Dave Kaufman. I spent quite a bit of time with him at the Toronto Expo in September. He is a great guy and a lot of fun. He has the best job traveling the world looking for reptiles in their natural habitat. He tries to see if how they are living matches how we are caring for them in captivity. Basically, are we keeping them right? Quite often, he finds that how these animals are living in the wild doesn't match the care guides. But as helpful as this information is, Dave is only there for a short time, taking measurements in that moment. These animals live there 24/7, 365. Is there a way to see how they are living throughout the year without the expense and hassle of traveling the globe? Yep, here's what I do. I mean, what I would do if I weren't psychic. Check out sites like iNaturalist or HerpMapper or Encyclopedia of Life. I'll put links below. Basically, these are sites where people can enter in observations of animals they find in the wild. It provides a rough geographical area, the date, and the time of the observation, and sometimes even a photo. You can take these observations to determine the ecosystem and elevation, and you can cross-reference against the weather for that day, or the average for the month. There are tons of sites that can tell you historical weather data, temps, precipitation, relative humidity, all of that stuff. Just Google a nearby town's historical weather and you should get some decent results. For example, Macklett's pythons. Those in Papua New Guinea and Indonesian islands tend to be the standard hot and humid, but those observed in Australia, well, lots were still hot and humid too, but I found a lot more variability with specimens collected in areas with temps as low as mid-70s when and where they were found, and humidity as low as 20%. Come back. You're not supposed to be wanting to climb your ground boa. Dumeral's ground boa. They are found in jungles, grasslands, sparse, rocky habitat at altitude, and even semi-arid, scrubby forests. It seems like they're like the corn snake of pythons, hardy snakes that can handle a wide variety of habitats. We are so lucky to have access to information that gives us a glimpse into their world, and we can use that to help us dial in the best care for the animals in our homes. How cool is that? That was a long one, eh? Thanks for sticking with me. I want to close by reiterating that following current care guides is a safe and responsible way to care for our pets. I am not, I repeat, not suggesting that you or anyone should disregard them in any way. Following established care guides will ensure that you have a healthy, happy animal. All I am saying is that every animal is unique. Maybe the genetic line of your pet originated from an area slightly outside of the norm, or maybe they just have a specific preference. In any case, pay attention to what your animal is telling you and make small informed adjustments to fine-tune their care. Thank you all for watching. If you liked the video, I'd really appreciate you hitting the like button and the subscribe button. That really helps. But most importantly, remember to nurture all nature. Bye! Say goodbye, Romeo. You little mischief maker. Okay, bye. I did it.
It's like you're getting dressed with a snake.
Okay, come here. Let me fix.
I was like, what? Hello.
Hello. Hi. No.
And no.
I hope I didn't move the mic too much. Oh, sir, you are not supposed to backtalk. You're a snake. Established how we got here. Let's get to the actual point of this video. So, what are you doing?
I'm a mess, okay.
Okay, let's try this one last time.